Welcome everyone to the timeline where we discuss the people, actions, and the world affairs that are shaping our world. So today we will be discussing, talking with our distinguished guest, where Hizmet movement stands, Gülen movement stands after 1 year of passing Fethullah Gülen, who was the founder, the source of inspiration of the movement. And I have distinguished guests. I like to invite them. Professor Sophia Pandya from California State University, who is the chair of religious studies. Welcome, Professor Pandya.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Honored to be with you on this show. And Dr. Alp Aslandoğan, who is the executive director of the Alliance for Shared Values. Welcome, Alp Bey. How are you? Both?
Thank you. I'm grateful. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so maybe some of our viewers, listeners may not be familiar with who is Fethullah Gülen and what is Hizmet movement or Gülen movement. I would like to ask Professor Pandya to tell us a little bit because she is researching and studying and has knowledge for this movement for over 25 years, as if I am not wrong. So, what is Hizmet movement and who is Fethullah Gülen?
The Hizmet movement is a movement that was inspired by the Islamic scholar, cleric, and mystic Fethullah Gülen, and the word Hizmet means service. So participants in this movement are very service and humanitarian oriented, and they also are involved with numerous projects around the world, launching schools, charitable centers, humanitarian activities, and Fethullah Gülen himself is known as Hoca Efendi to his I want to say participants and not followers, to those that are inspired by him, really. And he was an Islamic cleric who, in the Turkish style, maybe, was deeply influenced by Sufism. And he launched this movement, which is still going quite strong until today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Alp, the Hizmet movement is facing very bad persecution for last 10 years. And on top of that, last year, the movement lost its source of inspiration, Fethullah Gülen. So how that impacted the movement? So is there a vacuum? Who replaced him? How things are managed now around the world?
Loss of a figure like Fethullah Gülen Hoca Efendi, of course, is it's hard to grasp, and I don't think anybody can fill his shoes. But prior to his death, in a sense, he intentionally prepared the movement for his absence, his physical absence. Because the movement grew so quickly in Turkey from just a small community around Gülen in Izmir in the 60s, it grew to more than 1 million people in the late 2010, after 2010, I think. So because of the size of the movement, it has been naturally decentralized. So the activities, the institutions, it is primarily an education movement. So the main area of activity was education. So the hundreds of schools have been run by foundations. So Gülen did not have any direct interaction with these institutions. So the decentralization, in a sense, helped the movement transition to the phase where Gülen is no longer there physically. Also, from the beginning, he always said that he never intended to start a movement, but he simply attracted people who share a common vision. That is, we need to do something with education to address the social problems in our society. So he had this tradition of consultation, which is an Islamic tradition, that any strategic decision should be made collectively. And toward the end of his life, because of his medical conditions, he was very rarely available to meet with anybody. Therefore, in a sense, his last years and his strong advocacy for consultative decision making prepared the movement for his absence. So I think if nobody told us that he passed away, it would take months for people to realize that he is no longer alive.
So, I mean, who is taking major decisions now I see that there is centralization. Every country, every city even has their boards, as far as I know. But the major decisions and who sets the direction, in that sense, how things are administered when it is needed.
There's a council of 12 men and a board of 30 men and women that are making some of these decisions. But as you said, the movement is decentralized. A lot of the hundreds of centers and institutes are making decisions independently as they should. They're in different countries.
Yeah,
the
you have something
activities
to add?
of the movement. The activities of the movement are carried through institutions. Most of them are non-profit organizations. In the US, the 501c3 category. In other parts of the world, similar organizations, or sometimes they are also run as what we call social enterprise. So it's a company that is intended to serve the common good. So they are run by their boards and directors. Of course, there is a social network and moral and spiritual bonds among the movement participants. So there's communication, there are consultations going on, but the activities are actually on the ground, managed by their boards and directors. Now, Gülen, of course, personally did play a number of roles, spiritual direction, motivation, and a number of other roles. So those roles will be played by a group of senior participants who have demonstrated their commitment to the values of Hizmet through the years.
Yeah, Professor Pandya, as I said, you know this movement for over 25 years, and you are a professor about religious studies and movements. So, what do you think distinguishes this movement and Fethullah Gülen himself from many movements in the Muslim world?
Well, the interesting thing about the Hizmet movement is that as an Islamic movement, they are not so interested in building mosques, but rather in building schools. Fethullah Gülen himself believed that you could practice Islam by teaching math or computer science or technology. And so there was no direct proselytizing by movement participants. They believed instead that they should model the ideas of the movement, or the ideas, like Islamic ideas, really, that as interpreted by Fethullah Gülen, to spread Islam in a way that was not direct. Instead of like trying to convince people to be Muslims, instead they believe that it's important to just be a good Muslim and show other people what being a good Muslim is entails. To teach, to contribute your time charitably, to be kind, to be a good humanitarian. And I think that because of this approach, the movement has been quite successful.
Yeah, Dr. Alp, anything to add? What makes Hizmet movement or the Gülen movement different from other similar movements in Turkey or around the Muslim world?
Well, I can tell you about my experience having known some movements in Turkey. Well, some of them are really more like communities rather than movements, and some are bigger than communities. In terms of the Muslim response to the modernity and the question of how to be a Muslim in a modern society, a democratic society, there have been a spectrum of responses. Some movements are very conservative. Their interpretation of Islamic tradition is very, I would say, belong to prior centuries. And some of them have kind of left a lot of Islamic tradition and tried to embrace the West to a large degree. So I think Gülen's approach that was appealing to me was he is devout, he's a devout practitioner, at the same time valuing rationality. So in his terms, the integration of the science, integration of the mind and the heart, that was appealing to me when I interact with different groups in Turkey as a college student. Some of them I found to be too much into politics, and I did not see religion and politics mixing well. Some of them were too spiritual with no regard to science or rationality. So in Gülen's interpretation and Hizmet movement's practice, I found a balance of rationality and spirituality, democratic values, valuing arts, valuing all humanity, being open to all humanity, not seeing the world as enemies of Islam, like a balanced approach to the world, both in terms of the humanity and in terms of the philosophical currents.
And indeed, I like to learn a little bit about your own story. You little touched, Dr. Alp. You are a scientist and you are a graduate of the top university in Turkey. And if I'm not wrong, you're not coming from a conservative family background. So how you personally met with Fethullah Gülen's ideas and the movement?
So my first encounter with the movement was not through a person, it was through a magazine. As a high school student, I loved science. I was reading every science magazine available in Turkey at the time. There weren't that many, so it was not in the hundreds. It was just a few, several, maybe over 10, 15 magazines. So I was literally buying every science magazine available in my small city. And one day I bought this magazine, which was published by Gülen and his friends. It was on science, but it was giving the perspective on science of a faithful person. Although my family was not a practicing religious family, they were still faithful. And my extended family, there were many practicing people, people that I loved. My grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, they were practicing Muslims, and I loved them. So I was faithful, I was trying to practice, and I loved science. So in Gülen's writings and his friends' writings in that magazine called Sızıntı, I found my ideal combination of Muslims interpreting science, engaging with science, while remaining committed to their faith. And later on in college, I met with students of Gülen, and I liked them as people with good character. And eventually, after a couple of years, I met with him personally. Before meeting him personally, actually, I began to listen to his sermons on cassette tape. There were no CDs at the time. So I admired his logic, his use of the language, because when I went to a typical Friday prayer in Turkey, it was painful to me to listen to some preachers. They made logical errors. They sometimes treated the audience as children. They kept cursing at somebody or some country. In Gülen's approach, I found positivity, a positive approach. What needs to be done, what you can do about it.
Yeah, so amazing. Professor Pandya, is the Dr. Alp's story identical with your research? Because you met many Hizmet participants or volunteers, not just from Turkey but from around the world. So How you see that story?
Yeah, Dr. Story is it's only one of thousands of stories. People came to the movement for a myriad of reasons. Some people just met friends they liked and were slowly convinced that this movement was enhancing their life and spirituality. Other people were deeply involved in the movement from the beginning, and especially if they lived near Hoja Effendi or Fethullah Gülen, right, as he's more popularly known, in the beginning. So I have friends that had those deep roots. I have friends that were uh, coming from intensely secular backgrounds, and their families were very upset that they had joined the movement. But for them, the movement represented, as Dr. Alp said, a reconciliation of spiritual values, but also modern science, and also, to some degree, like the values of Anatolia before it completely modernized. Just some of the cultural values you can also find in the movement, and so for them, it's just was a way to acknowledge the past heritage while moving forward into modernity. And yes, this did upset some families, but there's so many stories, really. I also know people who have that they're lacking some of their family members, and they didn't have an upbringing, and joining the movement gave them a sense of stability and family.
Yeah, Professor, you had the chance to see the movement in Turkey in its, uh, let's say, good times, and you are
Yeah.
familiar with the people in the hard times, let's say. So, how do you see the break with Erdogan? This is also coming from an Islamic background, and he champions Islamic values. But what made the two persons or the two movements, let's say, if you see the AKP as a movement, what was the main reason for the break between these two?
Yeah. Abdülhamit Bey, you said that Erdogan also championed Islam, but his form of Islam seems to be very political and very conservative, and to some degree self-serving. For example, he's famous for holding a Syrian child in one hand, to signal that he's taking care of refugees, and then a Quran in his other hand to signal that he's a good Muslim. But a lot of what he has done really contradicts Islam in many ways. So between 2003 and 2013, the movement and the AKP had an uncomfortable or alliance, let's just say. But in 2013, because of President Erdogan's increasing, his reaction to the Gezi Park crisis, in which he released a lot of violence against people in the street, I think shocked people in the movement, and they realized that they could no longer reconcile the movement's values with Erdogan's actions. And then the nail in the coffin was the corruption scandal in which Erdogan's son was involved. And then, of course, as we know, the Erdogan, even before the coup attempt took place, began to fire journalists, to shut down Zaman newspaper, which had a very large circulation, the largest circulation in all of Turkey, and began to launch his clampdown. So I would say in 2013 was the beginning of, or is when the serious rift took place between the movement and the AKP party.
So, as a social scientist, did you predict that these two will not go well towards future, or this was to your surprise that there was the alliance ended?
I think everybody was somewhat surprised because it just was so abrupt and so violent. The extent of Erdogan's purge was vast and in many ways shocking. And on the other hand, it wasn't unexpected because we know that there's been so many coups in Turkey. So you have, 1960, 1971, 1980, 19, it just every 10 years it seems like you're having another coup in Turkey. So this idea that that Turkey would be sailing off into the sunset happily with everybody in alliance was, of course, not going to happen. And I think we also saw the beginnings of Erdogan's march towards authoritarianism. He was beginning to say things and do things that were alarming people. For example, he said that all women should have 3 children, that bars needed to close at certain times in Turkey. He began to move away from including Turkey from trying to include Turkey in the European Union. He became increasingly violent towards the Kurdish and Alevi communities. And so there were a lot of signs that things were going bad. And, some people were predicting that this uncomfortable alliance could not continue forever.
Yeah, Dr. Alp, how you see that relationship was, during the good times that there was good relations, and what was the point of it? What was the purpose of it? And why it breaks so badly? What is your interpretation?
Well, in a sense, it is actually very simple pattern. The movement support for AKP was principled because when AKP ran for elections in 2002 and re-ran a few years later, their promise was to move Turkey toward membership in European Union, which meant strengthening Turkish democracy, enhancing their freedoms, not only religious freedom, but all freedoms, including freedom of expression, reforming the constitution as required by the European Union criteria. And for the first several years, the government actually took steps to fulfill that promise. And this was actually appreciated by the leaders of European Union. So people tend to forget this era, in this era, when the AKP government took steps toward European Union, not only Hizmet participants, but a lot of other people supported them. A lot of Kurds supported them, Turkish liberals supported them. When you look at the people around Erdogan at the initial period, it was a spectrum of Turkish politics. So the split occurred because Erdogan actually made a U-turn from his promises. He was not sincere in seeking democracy. He was only seeking strengthening the democracy or civil society to, in a sense, gain an upper hand over the military and the hardline Kemalist politics. When he felt that he was strong enough, he made a U-turn and began to seek power for himself instead. That is when the split occurred. He expected the movement to provide unconditional support, Gülen to unconditionally support him. So this could not be done. It was unprincipled and unacceptable.
So what do you say about the critics who says the Gülen movement had a lot of government positions or the public positions filled with the Hizmet affiliated people, which was one of the very important critics. Of course, this July 15th coup attempt, and also the secular parts of the Turkish society saying that you emboldened Erdogan by your support in those good days. What you say to those critics, Dr. Alp?
I think understanding what goes on in Turkish politics requires an objective eye, because the actors within Turkey often interpret events from their political or ideological perspective. So it is, I think, objective to say that a lot of movement participants found positions in government, but that's because Hizmet movement is an education movement, and there have been a very large number of highly qualified candidates. So what happened during AKP time was there was no discrimination. Prior to that period, there was active discrimination on the part of the government toward religiously observant citizens. They could go into certain positions, but many institutions were not open to them. If they entered those institutions, they could not rise much. So by simply removing the discrimination, the government allowed a lot of people, not only Hizmet movement participants or graduates of Hizmet affiliated schools, but many other religious observant and other people who are qualified to take up those positions. So the success of the movement in education, in a sense, produced this result naturally because of lack of discrimination. Now, to say that Hizmet's alliance or Gülen always argued that there was never an alliance. It was a principle-based support. To say that it emboldened Erdogan, I think, is again misreading the history, because the movement supported AKP as long as they were true to their promises of moving Turkey toward European Union. And when they made the U-turn, the movement stopped supporting them. So it was principle-based. The movement never supported his ambition for gaining all the power that he has now. Actually, this was the reason for the split, because it was very clear that he was seeking power only for himself.
What about the alleged role of the Hizmet participants in the July 15th coup attempt? What do you say about those critics?
Yeah, well, we actually published a report on that. In this report, we compare three narratives. The first one is the government narrative that people affiliated or sympathizers of Gülen arranged or planned a coup attempt. The second narrative is a collaboration narrative that there were multiple actors, including Kemalists and others who were against Erdogan's authoritarianism. The narrative that we think has the strongest evidence is the collusion narrative, which is that there were some high-level commanders in the military who mobilized a small portion of the Turkish military, and then they abandoned them to be arrested as coup plotters. So when you look at the government's narrative, the evidence that they present, they are pointing to low-level officers as the actors. Well, those low-level officers, as officers, they were simply following commands by higher-level commanders. So those higher-level commanders, and we identified 6-7 people as the top-level commanders who mobilized units beneath them, underneath them. So those high-level commanders were never questioned. Erdogan government always pointed to some civilians and middle-level officers as the main plotters or actors, but they never questioned the top-level commanders who actually started the mobilization, including the force commanders and the chief of general staff.
Yeah, I remember Mr. Gülen called an international investigation, a true investigation about who plotted, and will be ready for the conclusion of that report or that commission. And also, number one of the coup attempt was acquitted recently by a United Nations tribunal. That's, I think, important to remember. But that is something beginning of a purge, a kind of social genocide for the movement. So July 15, 2016 coup attempt was a turning point for Turkish politics. Turkey became a one-man rule, and it had a great and terrible persecution for the Hizmet followers. Many people died, tortured, kidnapped, purged from the public jobs that they were closed, schools were closed, And Professor Pandya, you had a book coming up. You interviewed some persecuted members of the participants of the Hizmet movement. What did you find in those interviews? What they were telling you, and how they cope with this tremendous pain?
Thank you. I found that in my interviews that I carried out in 2018, 2019, and 2021 in Greece, that there was a wide range of experiences, but then there was also several patterns that I found. The patterns were that many people had experienced a social death in Turkey, social ostracism. There was family members, colleagues, neighbors that reported on people for even minor infractions such as owning a book by Fethullah Gülen, or sending your children to schools that were associated with the movement, which many people did, secular people did. Members of the AKP party had their children in Hizmet affiliated schools. But after the coup attempt, there just was a big crackdown where people were reported for these types of infractions. And so you became unable to get a job, unable to function in society, and also people became very afraid of arrest. And so large number of people went into hiding, and they were terrified of having a knock in the door during this time. From all of the experiences that people narrated to me, hiding was the worst. I mean, of course, torture is worse than hiding, but the fear of torture or the fear of arrest was so terrible for people during their period of hiding that they would even jump to the back of the room if the doorbell rang or if somebody knocked on the door when they were safe in Greece, because they were so traumatized during their period of hiding. I also talked to people that were tortured or had experienced sexual assault. And you would think that the sexual assault was women being raped. And of course, that also happened. But men were sexually assaulted and also threatened with sexual abuse or the sexual abuse of their family members. They were also kicked in the genitalia or tortured in their genitalia. So these stories were really hard for me to hear. And I separated my book into chapters. Of course, an introduction and then a chapter on stories of hiding and then stories of crossing, because for many people crossing into Greece across the river or the Aegean Sea was very very profound experience. They talked about before the Evros and after the Evros, before crossing the Evros River and after. And then jail. I have a chapter on jail, a chapter on their experiences in Greece. People were deeply appreciative of the hospitality that the Greeks showed them. But you asked me about the resilience that people showed. So most of the people that I talked to spoke of being excited to be able to arrive to their host country and to be productive and carry out Hizmet there. They spoke of carrying out active sabr, which means active patience. But they knew that they were undergoing something right now, but that they had to practice this form of patience that's in which you're not passive, you're moving forward, you're making plans, you're strategizing. They also spoke of feeling as though they were carrying out or living the lives of sacred figures from the past, that they were experiencing the same experiences that prophets from the past did, the same ordeals, and that they could then understand their own religion better because they were experiencing some aspects of the sacred past. They also spoke of their ordeal as an imtihan, which is in the Islamic terms, that would be like a sacred test where you're going through an ordeal, but it's going to spiritually cleanse you. And this was not something that completely healed them. They sometimes would talk about their tools, these faith-based tools, but they would also then cry about the funerals that they had missed, or the neighbors that had betrayed them, or about being so far away from family members. So this gave them a tool, but didn't solve all of their problems. They still, as many had experienced some forms of torture or some form of deep pain. I want to say that one gentleman told me that for him the most horrible part was being in a jail cell and hearing a woman being pulled away from her baby, and that he just heard the baby wailing and heard the new mother screaming, and he couldn't help them because he was in the jail cell, and this was his worst.
Uh, so, in such terrible persecution, in such terrible human rights violations, Professor Sophia, people tend to extreme, tend to violence. But in the Hizmet case, this did not happen so far. So, how you see this? Is it not striking?
Yes, your question is a very good one. In the world, we see that a lot of people that are oppressed and persecuted have turned towards violence to seek revenge, or also just because they're so angry and reactive. People in the movement are inspired by the words of Fethullah Gülen to take part or to practice the greater jihad and all forms of control of the self, because the greater jihad is a deep form of control of your own nafs. You're supposed to control your own like your lizard brain, right? So to have a more strategic and productive reaction instead of going into the fight and flight mode when you have a trauma. The Fethullah Gülen would encourage people to think, to practice active sabir, to practice an active form of patience where you strategize and consider the best actions that you can then practice for a better outcome. And I think this works. This idea of being, fighting, of being like a wild actor of just being dramatic. This is not encouraged in the movement. You really are encouraged to be much more thoughtful and self-aware of what you're going to do. And so people in the movement, in the post-2016 post-coup period, Fethullah Gülen's sermons reflected this, that he preached that people should be actively patient, that they should consider that their ordeal is a sacred test, that they should consider that they are on a predestined path, or yolun kadri, and that this will enhance them spiritually. And I think this inspired people to be patient, to be proactive with their responses. There was a famous scholar, Viktor Frankl, and he was interned in a concentration camp. And he said that what we need to, he noticed that people that survived the best from these concentration camps were those that had a reason to survive. They focused on what they were surviving for. They focused on the purpose of their survival. Because some people just gave up, right? They just gave up, and they didn't have a meaning to their life. His famous book is called Man's Search for Meaning. And I think that this is very true. You have to have you have to have a reason for living, a reason for surviving your ordeal. And Fethullah Gülen's sermons were inspirational to those that were surviving their ordeals, in that they gave them a reason, a purpose, and a way, an orientation to survive their ordeals.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Alp, we listen the stories, experiences of the persecuted persons, Hizmet participants. Overall, how Hizmet movement is coping with this oppression. Hizmet, we know, is not limited to Turkey. It's a global movement now. But I think the Turkish part is very important, has a weight in the movement in general. And of course, when you think about the loss of Fethullah Gülen, the source of inspiration at the same time, how Hizmet globally coping with this tragic period?
As you mentioned, the bulk of the movement in terms of the number of people are still in Turkey, and they are going through real hard times in prison, outside of prison. I think it is one thing to say that you believe in God and in the hereafter and the meaning of life, but it is another thing to really believe and to live that faith. I think deeper faith, strong faith, and whatever connections that they have with other people or mutual support, that is keeping them still in life, still attached to life. Because for every persecution that you suffer in this life, Muslims believe that there is reward for you and there is punishment for those who unjustly oppressed you. Now, outside of Turkey, of course, thousands of participants left Turkey. Some of them just through regular means, but many of them were not allowed to leave Turkey in violation of a fundamental human right, being able to leave your country if you are persecuted there. So thousands of them left Turkey. Around the world, I think we can categorize how the movement is going on into two. In democratic countries or countries where there's not a strong relationship with Turkey, or at least the country is not heavily influenced by Turkey, the movement is thriving. In the democratic Western countries and in many countries around the world who are not under pressure of Turkey, the movement is thriving. There are some countries where, because of some kind of an agreement or relationship, for instance, purchasing military equipment or receiving some kind of aid from Turkey, if the government is influenced by Turkish government, then Hizmet movement institutions have faced trouble. Some of them have been closed down. Hizmet movement participants who are Turkish citizens had to leave. But in the majority of the countries around the world, the movement activities are continuing, educational activities, the schools are continuing, dialogue and humanitarian relief activities are continuing. Over 100 countries, I think.
In that sense, how the Hizmet values, your institution, Alliance for Shared Values, had a list of values that is valid for all the participants, from Turkey to Kenya to United States or Canada. Can you underline the significance of this and its Islamic sources? Especially this is important when you don't have this figure, Fethullah Gülen. So the values are important, I think. How this is getting impactful on the Hizmet participants' lives.
Yeah. When I go around United States or other countries and speak to people, sometimes I ask them, I do a little poll. I ask them, how was your first meeting with the movement? Was it through a personal meeting with Gülen, or was he the primary reason why you decided to be part of this movement? And invariably, the answer, the response I get is, for about 98%, 99% of the people, it was not Gülen, the first encounter with the movement, or the primary reason for their decision to join the movement. It was the values that are expressed in people that they met. So the detractors of the movement in Turkey or outside, they try to portray the movement as a personality, charismatic personality movement. And it has been my experience and the experience of people that I talk to is that it is the values that are expressed in people's lives that attract people, because human beings have kind of an innate radar that identify people who share same beliefs and values as you do, and you get attracted to them. And when you see good examples, the actionable examples of those values, you get attracted to them. So in 2021, with the collaboration of 16 other organizations as the common voice of Hizmet movement, we declared the core values of Hizmet movement. These are 12 values. The first one is about human dignity, human equality, and respect for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of United Nations. And then peaceful and positive action, legal action, ethical action, protecting the environment, empowering women, integrating the mind and the heart. So there are 12 core values that we identified as they apply to everybody who is in the movement, Muslim or not. So these are, in a sense, universal human values, but they also have their underpinnings for the Muslim participants, the bulk of the movement. They have their references in the Islamic tradition. So 4 years later, this year in September, on the World Day of Peace, we published some of the Islamic references of those values. So these are values who have been practiced by the movement participants. In Gülen's discourse, you see the values. In Gülen's life, you see these values. In movement participants' values and activities, you see them. But there was a need to define them and express them, announce to the world. That was done.
Yeah, thank you for this great explanation. And we are almost getting out of time. This needs to have hours to speak about this extensive topic. But Professor Pandya, with your expertise on the movement, how you see the future of the Hizmet or Gülen movement?
The Hizmet movement is a very organized movement with groups of people that have a tremendous ability to collaborate quickly and efficiently with each other. So they have already begun to enact the plans that were needed after the passing of Fethullah Gülen. And I believe that since the movement was not centered on the figure of Gülen himself, but rather on the values which he espoused and which Islam espouses, that the movement will be able to carry on quite efficiently. Of course, after the coup attempt, there were some internal rifts and some bumps in the road, but the movement itself will undoubtedly carry on. It will be a little bit different in France than it is in Uganda, than it is in India, right? Because of local influences in each different country in which the movement manifests. But the ideas are very good and very appealing. It's this idea that we have universal human values that we can share with other people, carry out service to humankind, open schools, teach youth, volunteer your time. Those are really attractive and productive humanitarian ideals that not just Muslims espouse. These are some of the best ideas that humankind has come up with, right? So I think that definitely the better nature of people will carry these ideas forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Sophia. But maybe a little last questions. So, Muslim societies have a problem with the status of the women. How you saw this? Maybe a very short addition to, because in one of the headlines I saw the Erdogan's most let me see. Erdogan's most vulnerable victims are women and children. So I think we need to highlight them, the women in the movement, because they are also very badly persecuted.
Yeah, of course, this is not a quick answer, but let me give it a try. After the coup attempt, Erdogan really hit the movement where it hurts, and that's he hit the women and children. So Turkey is ultimately a patriarchal country with some honor/shame components to it. And so it's very easy to shame an Islamic family by hurting women. And so what he did, and this is evidenced by Amnesty International, other human rights organizations, is he went into hospitals right before or after women were giving birth, and he jailed mothers. In some cases, he put the mothers and their new babies in jail. Some babies were raised in jail for several months, even years. In other cases, he separated women from their babies, and women's breasts became engorged with milk. I heard many stories in which women had to express their milk into the sink or the toilet just to avoid mastitis, which is an infection of the breast. And of course, these stories are incredibly painful for for Turkish families that are involved in the movement to hear. It's for men, it was very, very traumatic to know that they weren't able to support their women's, their sisters, mothers, wives, daughters at the time of their most vulnerable moment, childbirth. They couldn't rescue them. And these women had done nothing to deserve this type of treatment. They had done nothing to deserve this. One woman said, "The only knife I've ever wielded is a butter knife." Like they had done nothing. So this type of action, jailing women and their babies, or taking away babies from new mothers, was purposeful. It was quite
Yeah.
purposeful. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm wordless. This is a very humanitarian, very peace-loving movement, and people having suffered that kind of persecution is unbelievable. But when you look at deep into history, you see that good people are suffering. So not always bad people are facing persecution and suffering. But I like you. Thank a lot, Professor Pandya, for your insights, and Dr. Alp. Many thanks. It was a difficult topic, but you made it very easy for me and for our viewers to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
And
the opportunity.
thank
And
you.
yes, it
And
was an honor.
it
It
was
was
it was
an
it
honor
was
to be here. Thank you.
it was my honor. I appreciate a lot, and thank you, our viewers and listeners who spend time to listen to our episodes and subscribing, leaving their comments. We will be very happy to have your support. And until next episode, stay well and goodbye.